At 11:47 on a Tuesday night, a phone lit up on a kitchen counter outside Columbus, Ohio. The message on the screen was 41 words long. It was never supposed to leave the sender's phone. 6 months later, that single text had ended a paving and concrete business worth $2 million, put 19 people out of work, and split a family that had shared a table together every Sunday for 3 decades. This is the story of Tony and Sal Marchetti, two brothers who built something real with their hands, and the moment one wrong tap on a phone screen took all of it down. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what that message said, who it was actually meant for, and why the fallout could not be stopped once it started. There is a reveal about halfway through this story that completely changes how you will understand everything that came before it, so stay with me. The company started in 1978 when the brothers' father, Dominic Marchetti, poured his first driveway using a borrowed mixer and a truck he had not even finished paying off. Tony and Sal grew up on job sites. They learned to read blueprints before they learned to drive a car, and they spent their teenage summers hauling gravel instead of going to the lake with their friends. When their father got sick in his early 60s, the two of them stepped in without much discussion because that was simply how the family operated. Nobody sat down and negotiated who would run what. They just fell into roles the way brothers who trust each other often do. Sal took to the numbers side of things almost naturally. He handled the books, the permits, the insurance renewals, and the quiet grinding logistics that keep a company alive long after the excitement of starting it has worn off. Tony was the face of the business. He was the one who could walk into a county office and come out with a contract, the one every crew foreman wanted running the job because he made people feel taken care of. For over 20 years, that division of labor worked without a single serious argument between them. By the time the company crossed the $2 million mark in valuation, it held contracts with the county, with 2 separate school districts, and with a regional home builder that alone made up nearly a third of its yearly revenue. 19 families depended on the paychecks that came out of that business every other Friday. Sal's 2 kids were on track to go to college on the strength of what the company was earning. Tony had just put a down payment on a small lake house he had been talking about since he was in his 20s. From the outside, looking in, the Marchetti brothers looked like a family that had done absolutely everything right, the kind of story a local paper writes up once a decade as an example of the American dream still working the way it is supposed to. But that particular night, Tony sent a message meant for one specific person. Instead, his thumb landed on the wrong thread, and the message dropped into a group chat called Marchetti Family, a chat that included Sal, Sal's wife, and their elderly mother, who checked her phone constantly since her husband had passed. Within 4 minutes, Sal had read the message twice, sitting up in bed while his wife slept beside him. Within 10 minutes, he was pulling on his boots and getting into his truck. Within an hour, the 2 brothers were standing in a driveway at midnight, shouting loud enough that a neighbor 2 houses down called the police, not because anyone was in danger, but because nobody in that quiet neighborhood had ever heard either of the Marchetti brothers raise their voice like that before. Here is what the message appeared to say on the surface, and what the entire family believed for the first several weeks afterward. Tony had written to a woman named Renee, someone outside the family entirely, about meeting up that coming weekend while he was supposed to be running a job site 2 hours away. Read on its own, out of context, in a panic at midnight, it looked exactly like the message of a man having an affair. For a family that had built its identity around loyalty, that alone was enough to set off a slow-motion detonation that would take months to fully play out. Sal's wife stopped speaking to Tony completely. Their mother cried for 3 straight days and would not eat dinner with either son. Tony kept insisting it was not what it looked like, but by that point nobody in the family was in any mood to sit still and listen to an explanation. For those first 2 weeks, that assumed story was the only story anyone told themselves. A marriage looked like it might be in trouble, a brother had embarrassed the family in front of the mother he had grown up trying to please, and the business would simply have to survive one more uncomfortable holiday season the way families like this always seem to. Trucks still rolled out of the yard every morning, crews still showed up on time, Sal quietly kept doing the books, and for a moment it genuinely looked like the company might absorb the shock the same way it had absorbed every other family conflict over the previous 40 years. Then, 3 weeks after that midnight in the driveway, Sal's wife did something nobody in the family expected. She had quietly kept a screenshot of the entire message, not just the fragment everyone had reacted to that first night. When she finally sat down with Sal and showed him the full text, calmly this time, without the panic of a 2 a.m. reading, they both noticed something they had completely missed the first time around. The message was not really about Renee at all. Her name appeared in it, yes, but she was not Tony's mistress. She was a business broker, working on behalf of a paving company based 2 counties over, and the meeting Tony was arranging was never a personal one. It was a meeting to finalize the sale of Marchetti Brothers' single largest client relationship, the home builder contract, to that outside competitor, using Tony's own signing authority, without telling Sal a single word about it, in exchange for a payout that would land in an account carrying only Tony's name. This is the reveal that changes everything you thought you understood about this story up to this point. Tony had not been unfaithful to his marriage, he had been unfaithful to the business itself. For 8 months, quietly and carefully, he had been negotiating to hand the company's biggest client to a direct competitor in exchange for a personal payout of just under $400,000, planning to walk away from Marchetti Brothers entirely once the deal closed, and leave Sal running a company that had just lost the one contract keeping most of its crews employed. In a strange, almost unbearable way, the affair story the family had spent 3 weeks grieving over would have been the easier version of events to live with. Once Sal understood exactly what he was looking at, everything moved fast. He froze every account the business shared with outside vendors before Tony could touch them again. He called the home builder directly and learned the deal was much further along than he had imagined, with paperwork already drafted and a closing date set for the following month. He also discovered that Tony had been quietly retitling equipment into his own name for almost a year, small transfers that looked routine on paper individually, but added up to nearly a third of the company's total physical assets once Sal laid every document out on the table side by side. Sal filed for an emergency injunction to stop the sale of the client contract before it could close, but the home builder, suddenly caught in the middle of a bitter family lawsuit playing out in public, made the only decision that protected their own business. They walked away from Marchetti Brothers entirely and signed instead with a third company that had no connection to either brother. In racing to stop Tony's secret deal, Sal had accidentally triggered the exact outcome that deal was quietly designed to prevent, the loss of the client, except now there was no $400,000 payout left to soften the landing for anyone involved. Within 2 months, 6 employees left for competitors who could actually guarantee steady work through the winter. The county contract came up for renewal shortly after, and Marchetti Brothers, now tangled in ongoing litigation and missing its largest private client, lost the bid to a company that had spent years trying to break into that market. Sal was running the business almost entirely alone by then, fighting a lawsuit against his own brother during the day and trying to keep the last remaining crews paid on time every single week. The legal fight dragged on for nearly 5 months. Lawyers on both sides burned through money neither brother had ever budgeted for, money that had once been earmarked for equipment upgrades and a second yard location. Their mother, who had signed early ownership paperwork decades earlier as a minority shareholder, found herself pulled into depositions she never wanted any part of, sitting across from lawyers and answering questions about a business she had once believed would outlive her. Thanksgiving that year happened in 2 separate houses for the first time in the family's history, and it has stayed that way, quietly, every single year since. By the following spring, there was no company left worth fighting over anymore. What had been valued at $2 million 12 months earlier sold in a distressed asset sale for $380,000, mostly equipment and the yard itself, split between the brothers only after legal fees took their share first. Sal used his portion to start a small independent paving crew of his own. 4 employees, no major contracts, nothing close to what his father had spent a lifetime building. Tony never received a cent from the deal he had tried to make, because the moment litigation started, the competing company backed out entirely rather than get anywhere near a public family lawsuit. So here is what actually happened, laid out in full, the way the family itself only understood it months after the fact. A text message sent to the wrong chat revealed a secret deal that would have quietly ended the business within months regardless of how it came out. The family spent 3 weeks grieving the wrong betrayal, an affair that never actually existed, while the real one sat completely unnoticed inside that same 41-word message. And once the truth finally surfaced, the very act of trying to stop it caused the exact collapse everyone was desperately trying to prevent, only faster and without any of the money that might have cushioned the fall for either brother. The lesson sitting underneath all of this has very little to do with phones or luck or a simple accident. Tony's plan was already going to end the company he grew up inside of. The text did not create the betrayal. It only stripped away the 8 months of runway he thought he still had to control how the ending would eventually look to everyone else. That is usually how these stories actually work. Once you look closely enough, the message people point to as the moment everything fell apart is rarely the real cause. It is only the first thing loud enough for everyone else to finally hear. If this story pulled you in, you should watch the video I made about a family-run hotel chain that lost everything over a single signature nobody bothered to read a second time. It follows almost the exact same pattern you just watched here. A small, quiet decision, years of silence sitting on top of it, and a collapse that looks sudden from the outside but never actually was. Click on it now, and I'll see you there.